What if you could express a truly spiritual legacy? I'd like to welcome Chris Koenemann to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely Friday. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Angelina.
It's my pleasure to host you, and I believe you're joining from St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States of America. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Wonderful. So, to all of our international listeners, he is local to the US, but we're going to have an amazing conversation that crosses many geographic lines. So, would you like to jump in with a brief icebreaker before I ask you the first question?
Sure. Happy to do so.
Okay.
So I suppose a little bit about me is that I began as a strategy consultant many years ago, and I specialized in org design. And eventually, I became a Benedictine monk and Catholic priest. I did that for 17 years, with 10 years of it as a priest. And there, I experienced kind of every aspect of a family business. So the owner circle and the manager circle and the family circle, if you think of the monastery as a family of affinity. And I became the number two, and there I helped to lead family discussions about this medium-sized nonprofit that we would run together. And I brought in a psychologist and psychiatrist to help us to deal with system dynamics because we had them in intensity. Everyone thinks, oh, monasteries are such tranquil places, but actually, like they're just like everywhere else. By the way, we were
It's almost
in
like
a
the real
city
world on like MTV.
very much. In fact, we were considered for a reality TV show at one point.
See, this is what
Um,
I'm saying. Okay, so I realize I'm interrupting you, but with a good heart here. Okay, so you were a Catholic monk for nearly 2 decades and a priest for over 10 years. What wisdom would you bring forward today regarding that path that has guiding souls for centuries now, regarding the wisdom of the Catholic Church and because that's 2000 plus years, and into the world of advising families as well as founders? Because we had a profound conversation yesterday regarding the distinctions that you've made in the last few decades.
oh, sure. So, I mean, if you think of Benedictines, we're one of the longest running governance structures in the world, right? 1500 years. So, um, there's a lot to learn from that dynamic. And we've also, perhaps best of all, changed over time. So that's why you'll see Benedictines running schools like we did in a suburban setting, or brewing beer, or making stained glass, or any number of different highly specialized works throughout the world. So staying adaptive, I think, is a key aspect of that, and staying flexible enough to re-express the mission over time.
Oh, that's wonderful. I once did an appraisal in Los Angeles for a property that was owned by the Catholic Church. And I remember when I went in, I saw the priests drinking alcohol. And I called my dad on the phone and he said, they also drive Cadillacs.
You'll
Because I
find
had this
every
idea that was
variety.
probably yeah. Anyways, so and any other wisdom that you might shine a light on?
Uh, I, I, I mean, I always would try to guide people towards a more kind of spiritual purpose, and I think we're going to talk more about that as we go, right? But also something that's dear to my heart, I suppose, in that category is trying to lift people's attention to spiritual capital is one of these kind of family capitals that people talk about in this space, and raising their attention there to like a higher power, so that people can maybe open up about something that's been especially helpful for them through life. In a way that's non-threatening for others, and then if you want to ask me of that, I mean, I I find the term grace to be especially powerful. And for me, it's something that heals and transforms and perfects a person. And it's not just like in that darkest of moments or in the treatment center that's the case, that a higher power like helps that much. I think it's all the time that God wants to help all that much. And so I wrote a book about how to thrive by God's help. It's entitled The Grace of Nothingness. So if you ever want to go on a deep dive on that topic, uh, there it is for that.
Yeah. So I think you said the 1500 years. So if I think about a family business, that's probably, I don't know, 10 generations. I don't know exactly in terms of trying to do the math in my head. But what I'm pointing to is the staying power. that there's got to be some type of wisdom regarding the staying power of the highs and the lows and the good, the bad, everything, and still being able to deliver a product or a service in the context of family businesses. So then if you can then advise families of, your crazy is not the only crazy that's out there, or your uniqueness is not the only uniqueness that's out there.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And I wonder if it's more like 40 generations, if you're talking about the Benedictine order. That's a long time.
Okay.
Um,
40
but
generation business. That's, yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a family of affinity, but yeah, but adaptiveness is the key there. And there could be governance that people can learn from the rule of Saint Benedict. There's spiritual stuff to learn there about humility as well.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, a lot of people like to look to that for lessons on servant leadership, for example. There's a great book out there called Servant Leader, I believe, about that topic. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in many families, particularly wealthy ones, the founder sometimes can become the gravitational force around which everything orbits regarding set roles, rigid roles, in fact. So in giving voice to the problem, what are some of the problems for both the founder as well as the rising generation members?
Well, I mean, speaking generally of the founders culture, right? I think sometimes it's referred to as the benevolent dictatorship, perhaps. It's good. It's agile. It's good at seizing opportunities. It's usually focused, hyper focused on seizing those opportunities, and perhaps just as a result um, access to certain decisions, certain resources are centralized a high degree, perhaps mostly with the founder himself or herself, and or with those who are especially close or loyal to that founder. And um, that is just kind of necessity the way it is, right? Over time, maybe it scales to the point that more collaboration is needed to kind of hold the whole thing together.
Mhm.
And in the good aspects of that, you can have a lot of loyalty and closeness. On the negative side, there's that risk of kind of power and control playing too big of a role. Every once in a while, there's that risk of um, a little bit of infighting and factioning. Especially if as the thing starts to kind of turn over to the next generation. Succession is obviously a tricky subject from time to time. Um, and it just, I think over time has to get beyond a founder's culture to something that is collaborative. And that just is a natural evolution. I think if you talk to enterprising families or look at the research of enterprising families, the culture of a G3 or a G4 is radically different than the culture of G1 or G2. Just over time, it does more.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things that I wrote down and notes over to you is, can the founder become like a god because of the charisma that they got to sell the idea initially, and they built this kingdom, they built this company into the marketplace, and that can be like a force of nature. And I also thought about even the cult of personality, and to certain family businesses that might not be the case. They could be very low key, but I just think about there's so much that comes with success as well as failure that we never know about until we're like right in the moment. And then we're trying to figure out how do I unpack this complexity in order to grow forward and not, stay stagnant or even worse, grow backwards.
Yeah, yeah, force of nature is a great word for it. I think, Complete Family Wealth, Hughes, Macenzio, and Whitaker talk about the black hole of the founder. Like it's such a huge gravitational pull there, right? That finding the right balance of being in that gravity, but and not being like thrown out of it, not just rejecting everything and going way far off, and not getting so sucked into it or sucked into the wealth as well as to just be um, dependent on it, but helping the rising generation to find the middle way of individuation there, of becoming their own persons with their
Mhm.
own dreams, is so important. And yeah, um, it's a recurring thing. I think there is so much centralized on the founder and so much attention. Like some family members talk about the business being another sibling, right? Like there's so much gravity there. Yeah. And I must admit, not unlike sometimes in monasteries where you have like a great founder of a monastery, like sometimes like he's highly spiritual and uh, that has its own positive dynamic for a long time sometimes, and then its own tricky dynamic in the waning years, right? And especially when those who were so dependent on him for a long time needed to come forth and learn to be their own selves.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's almost like this distinction between like the same chapter or the next chapter. And are they ready to write and create what the next chapter can look like, even if they take elements of the last chapter, or so they're not just living the same chapter over again and it feels like a coat that's too tight.
Indeed. Well, you have to be adaptive, right? You
Yeah.
have to, each chapter has to have its own genius and its own flavor, and you have to allow that to develop. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to agitate the problem a little bit more. And so I wrote to you about unspoken tensions, ego, control, even a misplaced legacy when it comes to understanding what these families need today. And if we go back to what you experienced with the monks, it's interesting if there was a television show, if you watch a bunch of monks like fighting or priests fighting, it's like, they're human. Of course they're human.
It gets even more complex because of the subtleties of the whole thing. But yes, very human. There's no doubt about it.
Because there's power dynamics, whether you're related by blood or like talk about families of affinity where you choose to have a loving connection in seeking that connection and that repeated connection with someone else. So if you bring a group of people together and they all share the same faith, even that brings up the question of what can the next chapter look like for all of those individuals.
Oh, indeed. Well, so this is a lot of what we did. So I said I brought in a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and they helped us to get to the point of having real conversations on important topics. And I learned that toolkit. It's beautiful. But then they helped me adapt my org design background to the family system setting. And I got to lead our family meetings or community meetings on that topic. And it's interesting. People would think there's such uniformity within Catholicism or such uniformity within even a one Benedictine house. And it is so radically not true. You know, and people who don't know it intimately don't know how many different shades of values that can, or accents of values that could be very strongly held and opposing, you know, and finding middle ground there is work. And we were able to actually do a lot of great work there. There was some beautiful times when I think especially the older generation was willing to sacrifice for the younger generation because generational issues, you know, are a common thing. And especially at this moment in the church, I think this is again clear to anyone within it, but not to those outside of it, that after Vatican II kind of opened the door to like change, you know, that now you have radically different points of view on what that looks like and different camps and etc. Um, yeah, anyway,
Yeah, I only kind of cut you off because I wanted the story to be able to develop in the next so many minutes of our conversation today. I just didn't want you to share it all up front because I
yeah,
wanted to, hold the suspense.
there's
But
plenty to
I
suspend.
yeah, I do. One of the things I think that's interesting is when coaching is powerful and when advisors really know what it is they're doing, whether they're a psychologist or they're trained with an attorney background, like you had mentioned about Jay Hughes Jr. I think when an individual is over target, you know then that they are making progress, and that's a part of change. Change is wonderful. It's scary. It's threatening. It's oxygen enhancing. It opens up doors. It allows for so many different things that that it's good when people start to go, okay, this is the truth, and the truth starts coming up because truth is powerful. It can be almost like a nuclear bomb sometimes in certain rooms.
Yeah, and life, right? There are certain crises in life that are powerful, and that those lead to spiritual awakening sometimes. In fact, in in my realm, we talk of three conversions in the spiritual life. That there's kind of three crises in life that propel us forward, and those are I think that aligns with what you say as far as truths that kind of knock us sideways sometimes when they're so obvious, but we haven't seen them for so long.
Well, I think that's one of the powers of coaching and advising families like you do, is you can kind of hold up a mirror and gently say, this is what I'm seeing. Because sometimes people get so caught in the day to day that they don't even have time to go, oh, that is right. Oh, that is true.
And if you let them speak long enough, usually they'll reveal already what is there, which actually they haven't yet fully seen, right? So it's interesting that they'll reveal it themselves.
Yes. So on the spiritual note of whether it's a, spiritual formation or family formation, how can the practices of what you've learned regarding spiritual capital inform how families could form shared values, a shared identity, even shared purpose across generations? So it's not about the entitlement of you getting more than me or fair's not equal or all the other dynamics that come up, even if I pass judgment on you because your car is not the latest model, which can happen in affluent families, all of
Hmm.
the above.
Yeah, I think values are so key to all of that, and but not values are the head level. I just want to be very clear. A lot of people think highly of value statements, but sometimes they're fake values, and sometimes they just get written down and not observed. Um, and then the heart lived reality of like the character level of that is a whole sometimes a very different thing. And I would say that the difference there that I explore in my process work of 8 key conversations with a family is the question of um, this is the way things are done around here. Like, what does that open up, right? We may say we are this way in our value statement, but in actual fact, um, what my mom and my brother make all the actual decisions or something, right? In actual fact, like there's some lacuna there that's very different than what we say we are, and I think opening that up so that like the those biases that just kind of develop sometimes just need to be opened up and realized. Some of those some of those roles just need to be shaken and be like, I think we put people into boxes for too long. I think we need to like, unassign roles for a while and meet people where they are and adapt to who they are today. Um, and then eventually, I think you take a look at each value and say, how is it lived out? And eventually, you choose. Like you say, this is explicitly the way we want things to be done around here going forward. And it's not just the founder is going to tell us the way it is, but we, the whole group, are going to make a decision of how we want to interact and collaborate and be together, and maybe be together a new way today than we were 10 years ago, because things do change over time. Now, you asked about spiritual. I mean, I think you can supercharge all of that work with a little bit of spirituality as well, because actually, for many people, not for everyone, but for many people, their faith is what underpins their values, right? So, you got that extra layer to refer to sometimes. And, sometimes because of our pluralistic society, we don't bring that as much into the business side of things as perhaps at other times in history. Um, but I'm talking about family or family enterprises, right? This is a space where you could perhaps do it. Now, granted, anytime you talk about values, it's hard if you have opposing values and difficult values, and that has to be done with the utmost tact. Um, but could there be a chance at deep forgiveness, for example,
Which
by
is really
reference?
needed. And I'm interrupting you right now, but is really needed in some families because they're carrying
Absolutely.
stuff forward.
Oh yeah. Like, and so could there be just a timeout that could like recenter things or reground things by, I mean, a simple thing like reference to the prodigal son. Like I have heard that story a million times. Um, but I've also heard it say in a way that all of a sudden opened up things for me when it was like, think of this as the basic explanation of like what is God's personality, and what does that mean if God's basic personality as the good father is just to be unconditional love for another person. And then what's that mean for me as far as identity? Like, oh, I am a beloved child of God, deeply loved no matter what, no matter whether I go into the business or no matter whether I pursue my passion elsewhere or no matter whether I've screwed up or what anything else. Um,
Yeah, and
and
I
then just
wanted just to say regarding that I think that you're speaking to this idea of unconditional love is really important because if the rising generation feels conditional love, not just with if they go into the business or not, but do they get the good grades? Do they make their parents look good? Do they fit in? Do they There's so many different aspects regarding conditional love, that even that can be a conversation that can be just something that's so foundational. I'm not inviting the rising gen to not step into their purpose or be trustafarians or addicted to distributions of a trust, but I think what you're speaking to is, can somebody just be good enough, you know, by by not being what somebody else expected them to be.
Uh, and what I'm fundamentally saying is, I think we are all that love child of God and good enough no matter what, right? I mean, I would push it even further, Angelina. I would say, like, what if the trust says you only get the money if you are Catholic, for example, right?
And
Like,
that happens, but
oh, it
but it could
does.
be it could be another religion I'm thinking of right now. You can
But
only
I'm,
marry someone of the similar faith, and that's written into trust indentures.
yeah, and but I would say, I mean, that's a big question right there, and it's a complex one of many different layers. But I think one thing that needs to be thought about is like, d does that express unconditional love? Like, is there a strong condition you're putting there? And are you putting it on a 20 something, right? Because, like, with regard to faith, again, like, most of us are one thing at 25, another at 35, another at 55, another at 75, right? And you can't impose a maturation on other people. Again, you have to kind of go through those crises in their own spiritual awakening.
Yeah. And one of the things we chatted about yesterday was how honest children and teenagers can be and just calling things out, like if that works for them or not, or if they think that value is authentic, they might just blurt it out because they don't know any better yet.
Yeah, so I mean,
Bless their hearts.
I taught high school. I taught eighth grade for a long time as well, and I've walked with a lot of young people in various different scenarios, 20s and 30s and 40s, etc. And it is amazing how good teenagers are at being a barometer of what's like authentic. They are so very good. I found out time and again as teachers, we all knew this actually as teachers, that they would sniff out if inauthenticity well before the adults would. And then like eventually we'd be like, yeah, the kids did like that person or the kids didn't like that person. And now we see, it's played itself out. It's amazing. So yeah.
I just think that this conversation is very important in the sense that, and I'm going to ask you to define spiritual capital in a moment, but there are years of experience that you have regarding guiding others. And I think that there needs to be good guides. This metaphor might sound trite, and I've utilized it before on my podcast of the Boy Scout or the Girl Scout leader that's going to lead someone through the woods to the canoe by the lake. But only do they have that knowledge of avoid the poison ivy there or avoid this or that along that path before you get to where you need to go. But only someone who has walked that journey can truly share what it is one, needs to look out for or be aware of. Like when you had spoke about like, well, you say those are your values, but are they really are? Like no one likes to get called out. But there is something to that awareness of like, okay, well, if we're really going to be the real deal, and if we're really going to be invested into our family business, our legacy, our personal development.
Yeah, I mean, you're aware that I hiked the Appalachian Trail not too long ago, and so this notion of other people who have mapped out the path for us and helped us to avoid the pitfalls is crucial. And I hiked up north with two amazing guys, two retirees. One was an ultra marathoner, and one was an Ironman, and like, look, we got each other through the hardest moments up north when there were storms and there was like nasty stuff. And like, there was a time we had all made it to the next road crossing, all made it to the diner. And by noon, I think we were all drunk because we were ready to say, like, 2 days ago, when there was a place, nowhere to get off, we would have all quit. But by 1 o'clock, I think we were all ready to go back on trail together and tackle it again.
Wonderful. How do you define spiritual capital just as a baseline for the listeners?
So I think the broadest definition would be meaning beyond ourselves. I think it's key to meet everyone where they are, and that's probably the easiest definition, most universal definition. Um, Again, I applaud Jay Hughes for beginning the family capitals in general, human, intellectual, social, and spiritual. And then his initial definition of humility and gratitude, I think,
Hmm.
again, are universals that could be applicable in so many scenarios. Um, I am advocating for at least a broader definition of higher power as well, because I think that fits many universal settings, and can open up a conversation where people merely give a testimony about what helps them in their dark moments, or more specifically allows grandma maybe to tell that story of how she got through something super difficult that it's applicable to others. Because sometimes the younger people may not yet have that experience with a spiritual awakening, but it's at least now nice to hear, like, okay, when I go through that crisis, I can maybe lean on something that got my elders through it as well. And so higher power, if you think of AA, is just a general term that I think a lot of people are able to access and respect. And then within that, people can tell their own stories of mercy and forgiveness, etc. Grace. I specifically, I mean, I love grace. I wrote a whole book about the power of God helping us, right? Grace. And I think there's a lot to be said for synchronicity, providence, intuition, and learning all these kind of subtle aspects of how to navigate life, how to live life more from a heart point of view than a head point of view, right? And yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah. What I think makes you such a great advisor to families is what you spoke of regarding humility and that journey. Sometimes success shows up repeatedly over the years, and then sometimes that thunderstorm of tragedy also shows up, and then it raises that question of how does one rebuild from there? And many successful families do, and some families have the playbook, some don't. And I think that's where, whether you know about and can reference like the book of Job or your specific knowledge and skill sets, whether that's again organizational design and you had worked with some big companies early on after college, but also just understanding that spiritual walk and path that no karma, no energy is ever wasted in our journey.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that yesterday, it was very meaningful to me. Th This was very helpful. I tried my best to heal my situation from the inside out, and there was regression at the Abbey. It was after several years, and they asked the psychologist, the psychiatrist, and me to all stop our works, and that kind of propelled me. Plus, some other experiences that came after it that were kind of hard, really hard for me, um, propelled me into the Appalachian Trail. And I had to think about life, had to process that. Like, first of all, when you go through something traumatic, you got to process it no matter what. I had gotten good at that by that point.
Which is really healthy
Um,
that you did process it because sometimes people can freeze.
mhm. No, you got to feel it. You got to I mean, with all feelings, right? You have to let yourself feel the feelings, and and just give space for that. And, like, easy examples, grieving, like, you'll have to go through grief. You might as well give yourself the time when it hits to sit down with it, right? And that's key.
Well,
And
it's
then
raining. Well, it's raining on the Appalachian Trail.
yeah, or storming and you get mad at God in the Appalachian Trail. I did that as well. I remember one fateful day where I gave God everything. I think he can bear it, by the way. I think a lot of people should do more of that, is give God like a full assessment of how unhappy you are with the various things. And
Compared to holding it all in.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, yeah. Again, I think our relationship's big enough that he could take that. He's a big enough person to take that. And I think it's good for us sometimes. I mean, there's unhealthy ways of doing that, so like don't go to excess. But yeah, and I have had to grapple with some things and where my life's going now, it's playing itself out. I'm still discerning all of that, right? But the notion of Job, if we're just going to jump to the end of the story right now, um you
It
know
worked out for
I
him.
it worked out for that. I love that. Yeah, and that's why your notion of karma's never wasted or whatever is a fun expression for me. But yeah, like, here I am, starting life over at 46, like, no retirement, just getting started in my family advising practice, and looking around, see to, like, is there a relationship perhaps for me out there?
Well,
Like,
I
is there
think
a
that
family potentially for me? Like, there's so many questions for me right now, and it seems Well, I mean, like Job in a certain sense.
Well, I think that there is a deep well of knowledge that you can pull from and you will pull from. And it's just a matter of finding your sea legs again in this new identity. And you will. And I know that humans are meaning making machines. I almost thought of perhaps maybe you came across someone with a narcissistic personality that may have either been threatened or if there could have been jealousy regarding like what they call pathological envy with narcissists. And, uh, and, and, and there is a shock sometimes when someone gets chewed up and spit out because you go, oh, I meant well, and yet sometimes it takes time, but the healing does come.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to comment too much on like, people who could be identified type thing, but um, yeah, there are complex situations with humans, right? And I think when you're looking at a monastery or you're looking at a family enterprise, you're talking about identity conflict. I think Doug Baumel with deconstructing conflict is so good about this. You're looking at identity conflict, and that gets intense, right? That gets really super intense, which is why succession stories are so hard. Um,
Because it
and
involves relationships, and not only are relationships complex, but everything is complex today in today's world. Please go ahead.
yeah, but also like it involves sometimes images of people and who they thought they were going to be within that family, within life, and like things become very different sometimes than their image. And that's a lot. And I'm glad to say that like there are wonderful lessons to learn, and there's a bright side on the other side of this, right? That can be had for anyone who's gone through that. Um, but it's true. Like the intensity, it's a pressure cooker, right? It gets, the opposing goals get that much stronger. The way they play out, there's historical impasses. Um, like there's a lot that can be going on there, and yeah, I think I've learned in my book that I love this line, First Thessalonians 4:3b. This is the will of God, your sanctification, which if he's willing it, he's working on it. And so um that means that God's constantly working and reworking on making you, Angelina, and me and everyone else the most amazing versions of ourselves. Like from this day forward, like there is a new path of blessing. There's a new path of becoming amazing from this day forward, and that can help draw a person out of the foxhole, right? And it's nice to have foxhole friends that draw you out of the foxhole too. And that if you know someone that's in that foxhole, jump in with them and draw them out, right?
Oh, that's
And I'm
brilliant.
happy to do that.
Yeah, I just want to slow you down on that point. I think that's incredibly brilliant because there are rising Gen family members that are very bright and doing well. And then there are others that are overwhelmed, like you referenced the pressure cooker, and they are saying, I'm in the middle of this foxhole and I'm drowning. And so what
Yeah.
you just said that you would meet them there compared to what some people do because they just don't know any better, but they'll pat them on the back and be like, get out of there. And it's not just like 4 or 5 words and a pat on the back. It's like what they're dealing with and the gravity of that is real for them because it's like reputation and self-esteem. And are they competent enough? And if their
Yeah.
self-esteem is connected to their ability, female or male, to be productive, woo, you better meet them where they're at.
And their place in the world, like it's like so much to hold at one time, right? So again, like
Don't let them
um
fall. Yeah.
jump into the foxhole with that person. I've had friends jump in with me. I thank them for them. I've had a lot of people help me recently. I thank them for that. And I'm happy to jump into that foxhole and help others too. Or if there's the founders culture that's especially influencing a family or a family enterprise, I feel I have the experiences, certainly. And I think also an amazing process. Informed with how to bring it to family systems theory of how to help get through that founders culture to a brighter day and or to get an individual through whatever they're going to a personal thriving. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you've seen different cultures. You've been a part of different cultures, whether that was corporate or whether that was, the nonprofit world being, uh, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. And people, I don't know if people reflect much on culture, but like uh, think of it this way, like a firefighter's culture is different than a corporate culture, which is different than an academic culture or different than an entrepreneurial culture. Like those are radically different experiences of what it's like to be together, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
And context matters.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's and if you're not from one of those cultures or you haven't experienced one of those cultures, it's worth as a group, like this is where you get to choose things and become explicit about how you want to do it together. It's worth looking at the firefighters and being like, hey, look, because they're doing something hard together, they just want to support each other all day long. Like they're just happy to come be brotherly with each other all day long. And what can we take from that, and apply it to our own circumstance type thing? Um, this is where the reset really gets powerful in the cultural change. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how did your vows of obedience, conversion of life, and stability inform your perspectives on letting go of control, especially in any advice you can offer others, whether they find themselves in the middle of succession planning, or they find themselves with an empty life, they find themselves with entitlement of what they didn't get, maybe to compensate for love or life without joy today. I'm agitating the problem here.
That's fine. I had every expectation of returning to the Abbey, and something happened that made that seem unwelcome. And I did. I took a vow of stability there, which meant living with the same people for life. I had every expectation of going into the ground right there.
Oh, that's
And
like a divorce.
I've heard many people say this, and I think it's very analogous.
Yeah.
And
And
you
and
know, and
also and also I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you again, but I also realize that betrayal can happen in family businesses 6 ways to Sunday. So that's an experience that transcends, time and culture and details.
but I think it's important to remember that the crisis is not the final part of the it's not the final chapter, right? If you're thinking, okay, let's think of um the hero's journey, for example. Like you get your crisis propels you out, right, into whatever the journey is. And even on the journey, you will have a moment which is seems like all is lost and dark as can be. And and usually, and it's not just a literary, you know, mechanism here. I think this is you get to those truths that you were talking about earlier that you talk about with your client. Like it's the truth that like the brightness shines in after that, right? Like that you got to get through that darkest moment when it all seems lost on the hero's journey. So as to get to the light that comes after it, so as to get to the new place where you can bring new learning and new experiences and new life-giving things to perhaps the old situation or perhaps a new situation. That's that you just have to keep looking for where, well, I would say where God's leading us, but where you find meaning and love, and sometimes if you haven't felt it for a long time, you may be given the opportunity to re-experience it and let that enliven you.
Yeah. Some parents encourage their children to explore beyond the acceptable comfort zone, and some parents don't. So when you talked about the crisis propelling you out, it's a it's a post-traumatic growth opportunity if they're willing to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And easier said than done.
Yeah. Also easier said that. But there's ways to do it, and there's people to help along the way.
Yes. So so you were trusted with deep conversations, and I was curious, what is it that you think both founders as well as the rising generation members carry around with them if they could give words to their feelings and experiences?
Oh, I think a lot of us carry around heavy feelings, right? I think the better we can do it, letting go whatever that is, shame or blame, um, the better life is, Brene Brown's great on shame, if anyone wants to do that. Yeah, there's a lot, especially when you're talking about perhaps control or on the flip side of things, missing out on things, right? Some family members, rising gen, have told me like, yeah, dad was a great businessman that did not make him a marvelous father, right? Like, and those are two very different roles and different dynamics. And um, they're both carrying that at that point, right? And I could tell intense, like I'm thinking of one person who was, I mean, very pained when he said that. And it's the better we can help to just let some of the steam out of all that, the better we can help to, like, there's always a chance for reconciliation, but first and foremost, actually, um, is that forgiveness is about one's own interior freedom. And Jacques Philippe is great about that, the book Interior Freedom. Like forgiveness is about my moving forward, because if I don't, maybe the other person does move forward even if they've hurt me, and I get stuck in the past, just like stuck in that like vortex or whatever. So forgiveness is actually about my moving forward. Reconciliation is a different process that's later, and that's entirely dependent on whether that person wants to reconcile. And I could get to the point, hopefully, of willing the good of the other person, but from afar. Like eventually you could say, like some people will say, well, no, I will never. I've heard people even say, no, I don't even want that person to go to heaven. Like, and I could see where you get to that intensity. Like these systems get so intense that it becomes, I've heard people talk about fratricidal and such, like it almost, type thing. Like it gets intense. But I think you got to be able to will the other person's good from afar and say, like, maybe they can't be in my life. There maybe needs to be a strong boundary and limit there, but I don't will them ill anymore at a minimum. Or someday I hope to at least hope for something good to happen in their own lives, as long as they're over there and not over here.
I think
Um,
what you're speaking of is emotional freedom, and also that you're able to handle the heavy, because what people carry around sometimes is the heavy.
yeah, and so I mean, recognize it in one's own self, recognize it in one's relationships. Hopefully, they're still like we're thinking that father-son dynamic close enough that they can eventually have a new page, like and they can release some of these roles or release some of these blame and just move on to experience each other anew.
Mm.
That would be a beautiful thing. Um, because hopefully they have a few years where they can at least be present to each other from then on out, you know?
Which is such a tender space.
Yeah,
That's much
yeah,
needed.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the questions I wrote down for you is, what can become possible when founders and rising Gen family members could have an hour with you once a week, and that's not necessarily to have a confession, but
No.
rather what you had just spoken about regarding creating something anew and that emotional freedom, and if I go back to organizational design, designing something that's new and better and not just the default, because sometimes what's familiar isn't always good for us, even though I think it's called like repetition compulsion or compulsion repetition or something. That's a psychology term.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I touched upon it previously, like the process work of a family co-creating something that's new for them. I think that's beautiful, especially getting beyond the founders culture. Um, on an individual level, many of the things we've already said apply, but I think here of like teleological coaching is one thing I do on the more universal non-Christian level, and that telos is purpose, so helping people to find their purpose and their goals that meet that purpose. Um, an individual, if they've been thrown out, like Joseph, the patriarch, like we think of this biblical story of his brothers throwing him down the well, right? And then he gets sold off or whatever and down to Egypt. Like that poor Joseph needs to find his new purpose, right? And I feel for that poor Joseph. And there is a new purpose for him. There is a new world for him, and to help him find that. And eventually, in the story, it's beautiful. He becomes like the administrator of Egypt and helps his family when they're in destitution under a famine or whatever. So it comes full circle. But I think you
And
just have to focus on your own thriving, and I can help an individual to find that on a universal level of purpose, or on a Christian level as far as bringing grace and God's help into that as well. Yeah, I'd love that.
yeah,
And then families, I love qualitative planning. I love helping them to hopefully think through these questions before they become crises. The ounce of prevention, like the like let's get out and front on some of these. There's wonderful surveys to take on how things are going, best practices to follow to help have the conversations people need to have up front about what's going on so as to not turn them into crises on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think wise advisors are needed. Okay, so what does a Catholic or more broadly spiritual view of legacy look like to you?
So I I want my legacy to be union with God. Like I know that sounds so strange to some people, but I think that when I say grace heals, transforms, and perfects us, it means that God intimately wants to get into my life and co-author it with me, and then I can let him do that as fully as possible. We call it sanctity in the Catholic Church. And it was only recently that the church defined that as universal. And so noting in everyone, at business members, business leaders, whatever, everyone's got that call. Like no matter what, like actually the heights of it is we are all called to that by God's help. And I want to find what that means for me. That brings my own contribution in this world, and hopefully those can be beautiful contributions. But that's very secondary for me. Like I would much rather live the perfect joy of like a Saint Francis rather than Saint Francis puts it in conversation with healing everyone or working miracles or converting the whole world, and he's like, no, it's more about you just having that relationship, and he sees that as the pinnacle. And I as long as you're focused on that, or you're focused on love, my purpose is to love and be loved.
Mm.
The golden rule is so basic yet we forget it. um
And that's not he who has the gold rules, but on bump.
exactly. And like you see, like what a juxtaposition, right, in this conversation. um that no, to love God and neighbor as yourself, like that's we all, a lot of us learned that when we were young, and like totally forgot about it. That's the great purpose of life. And I think that's whatever your purpose in life is also your measure of yourself. So here, if we think that our purpose is to be the inheritor of the family business and it doesn't happen, like you get crushed by the whole thing, right?
Mm.
But if your purpose is to love and to be loved, you can navigate a lot of difficulties and reinvent yourself a lot of different ways and be extremely resilient and of great help to people as well. That's so fundamental that you can live that even when you're ill as well, or in the ICU. You can just love and be loved and be present to people.
That's a lovely guiding principle as well as a great metric or what they call a KPI, key performance indicator.
It is, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
so what I would like to do is get more people to see that as their great purposes to love. And it helps reorder so many different aspects of their lives. Like again, like that's one of those things that reorders relationships, reorders workaholism, reorders, just every dynamic really, because it simplifies things down to right now I need to love maybe myself by taking a run. I need to love my family members, and I need to love in my business setting and be good to everyone. And prioritizations get a lot easier then. It's the old thing, like get your priorities straight and things somehow fall out pretty well.
Yeah. I think, again, this is an important conversation to have regarding that love aspect, whether one is Catholic who is listening to this right now or is not Catholic, because technology is just advancing and advancing and advancing. And yet, when we think about humanity's capacity to love, is it catching up? Is it equal to the speed of AI, artificial intelligence, and where technology is going today in the trajectory? Anyways, so I think
No,
that's really,
no, I think it's beautiful because I like sci-fi, and I like this one show called The Expanse. It's fantastic. But its basic premise is it's 200-ish years in the future and as realistic as possible. And technology has advanced, but human nature has not, right? And
Mhm.
and like how beautiful, like we kind of think, oh, just because technology is on this huge upswing at the moment, that human nature is too. Not always the case. I mean, I'd love for it to be the case, and I think that that possibility is there with grace and just in general. But I think we're far from the mark more often than not on some of that, and we need to keep realizing that just because technology is getting better, we are not always commensurately better.
Yeah. Character and love still matter. Religious life is structured around rituals and seasons. How can wealthy families or family business members create their own rituals and rhythms to sustain unity and identity across generations?
So, I mean, I think first is basically those rituals that reground us. I think so often the family has its own rituals that reground us, or, you can think of Thanksgiving in that regard. Um, but also, like any religious tradition has its rituals that reground us and help us to reconnect with kind of our deepest selves. Maybe a family vacations that moment when certain things happen or happen every once in a while in a year or retreat or something. Um, but wherever we kind of step out of life for a moment, and especially step out of life together for a moment. I know some people talk about that kind of um, process of integrating the rising gen as a moment when there's certain rituals around that. Um, there's there's just whatever helps to reground you. And I think that is why rituals exist. They don't exist for themselves. They exist as commemorations of things that are important to us. And sometimes they are much deeper than that, even still.
Yeah, I thought you might add to that list that perhaps family meetings, as well as intentional retreats, can also be a place to foster collaboration and
They are, well, I was just assuming that they were there, but yes, they are a best practice to do, at least say twice a year or so. Yeah. And if you want facilitation with that and help with that and help with some qualitative planning on all that, I would be happy to assist.
good, good. Founders can often wrestle with ego. And this is so interesting because I just have dealt with this the last few weeks, the ego of some individuals that, so founders often wrestle with ego, wanting to be remembered and, uh, and that need for control, even, after they pass posthumously. What spiritual traditions help us tame that ego in service of something greater?
Um, wow. Okay. I think that's one's own inner journey, right? Like you can't do the work for someone else type thing, right? Like that's a classic dilemma there, right? You can only give testimony and help them to think through it a little bit on their own. But there are those teachable moments. So at least seize the teachable moments when they are there. And perhaps they do most center around certain things that kind of become more intense in life. Perhaps not always as intense as a crisis, but just more intense moments in life. And I would say this is very important. In fact, I would say that look during those intense moments, there could be a person brought into your life just for the reason of helping you through those intense moments. Like there sometimes a providential, someone is brought there to help walk you through that. And sometimes that outside perspective can break through more easily than someone that's close, right? Sometimes that you need the close person to recognize this confluence of the other person that has the capacity to do so, so as to join that and let that do the trick rather than the person that's too close. Like I said, it's very hard to heal something from the inside of a system. It's usually you want help from the outside to help heal a system. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There wouldn't be that association with that outsider coming in.
right, and
Yeah.
there's yeah,
Yeah.
they're an unknown quantity to a certain extent. Like they have their own, well, I would use the word grace, but they have their own special thing to bring to the situation.
Yeah. It's interesting. There are both good and not so good aspects of ego. So on one hand, ego can be that self-confidence boost to get someone out there. But I also have heard in sales that ego is edging God out as the acronym. Ba-dum-bum.
Edging God, I've never heard that one. It is hard to surprise me with corny religious acronyms, but you did. Um,
Ba-dum-dum.
I, I I know many people who would agree with you, but I I must admit, having done some work myself, I'm not trained in the psychological toolkit, right? But I think the ego, the superego, the id. I think there's a certain healthy, to my knowledge of this, again, I'm not a specialist, there's a certain healthy ego that you want to have as well. But yes, at an unhealthy, excessive level, it can push a lot of things, including God out, including other people out, right? Like you certainly start to limit your ability to focus on other people.
Yeah.
You limit your ability to be present in difficult situations above all. You check out too often, or yeah, presence is such a beautiful topic to explore on some of that. Vulnerability is an amazing. So they say empathy is the other way that you can really learn of other people. Yeah, they can't always be as empathetic as they would like to be. It's important to meet them at what they would like to be. No one makes any change unless they would like to be better at it. And vulnerability is another thing I like to talk about with people that, I see it as a superpower, but it takes a long time. Sometimes it's a long journey for some people to get from seen as something to be feared, and being vulnerable with people who will hurt you is something you should guard against.
Mhm.
Um, but with proper relationships, you can be vulnerable, and it only helps grow the relationship in the proper measure, right? And eventually, it is kind of a superpower that you could be like, yeah, I hurt too, and it connects people, and I've gone through that too, and life is messier than, say, a 1950s TV show, right? Like there's a lot going on, and some of us have gone through it, and it's important to say that sometimes.
Yeah, I think it will give an exhale moment to others that are out there. How can the practices of forgiveness and reconciliation become tools for healing fractured families?
Oh, I mean, we talk a little bit about that with the interior freedom, but I guess let's talk about it now under the lens of reconciliation, right? Because we didn't do that as much. Um,
Or redemption and repair?
and well, redemption and repair sounds even better than reconciliation, right? Like that sounds like you're fully happy and reintegrated in such a way that everything's made good again. That's like the most beautiful ending to the story. Um,
Because bitterness is real with individuals. And you add
it,
family, and it's like even better.
yeah, I mean, I think you have to get each person to the personal development of wanting to reconcile. Okay, so you have to sometimes put a structure in place to help them get there. And again, that's where an outside influence could help. And if faith is a part of the equation, that could, like, bringing faith into it helps that much more, right? Because usually there's beautiful stories that can be told, reminding us of the necessary for reconciliation, um, and motivators as well. But so personal development, eventually, I think you have to hope that there's just a strong bond there that helps as well. I mean, I am thinking of Doug Baumel in some of this, and deconstructing conflict, but he uh, he was good about that. But the reconciliation on the kind of spiritual level, um, it's I think it's, again, willing the good of the other sometimes means we're going to have to live this life together no matter what.
Mhm.
We're not going to just be able to will each other's good from afar. So we're going to have to learn to be civil, at least during certain exchanges. We're going to have to learn whatever this historical thing is that's separated us, or severed, needs to be mended, and we want to do the work on both sides, but like each side needs to open up, one step towards that at a time. Um and I mean, it's beautiful, it's worth aspiring to, right? Because life's too short to have enemies, life's too short to have broken bridges. Like, we all have. Oh, I love this about the trail. This is amazing about the Appalachian Trail. Everyone was on an arduous journey. All these through hikers going 2,000 miles down the Appalachian Trail were all on an arduous journey. No one wanted to make the journey any harder for anyone else. Like, the journey was already hard enough. And I think that's analogous for life as well. Like, we are all on a very difficult journey, and let us not make anyone else's journey any harder than it needs to be. And I think that if you had two individuals that had done their personal work that were high functioning with empathy and love, like they too would be like, okay, something very difficult has happened, but we do want to not make the journey any harder for each other, and at least like what can we figure out together to do that?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. One of the things that we had talked about yesterday, I just have to find it quickly in my notes, was your values around even just peace. I know that you had brought up some others, in terms of the cardinal virtues of love, faith, and hope, but definitely, peace.
I think yes, I think a lot of us lack peace these days, right? So we strive in unpeaceful ways, and we get burnt out sometimes, and we are, to your previous question, sometimes doing a little bit too much of our own carrying of the issues and not letting other people help. Sometimes we're too self-reliant, and that's not bringing us peace. Um, Self-reliance was the great adversary I had in my book for the grace of nothingness. That self-reliance is just too often leading to a lack of peace. And I think generally
Well, it puts it
those
all on our
who,
shoulders, as if high achievers need more pressure.
yeah, and I think okay, so generally I have this polarity map out there on my website on the spiritual accompaniment coaching page, and it shows that those who are like more in the natural living than the spiritual living, I think that they both mutually complement and we need them both. But there's a risk of not knowing where to find peace. There's a risk, of not knowing where to find the things that bring deeper joy. And the spiritual component of whatever tradition um, brings that. Like taking a little bit of time out for meditation of whatever tradition helps with that. I mean, I also think God's grace, I would add that to the equation, really helps with that. But like I think we need to at least recognize to ourselves how much we would like to have peace and sometimes lack it. And then we need to start seeking out the things that would bring that peace to us.
I think that's one of the best calls to action ever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
So designing a legacy that transcends, what if you could, what might you say to a founder or even a rising Gen member that's putting it all together in terms of backwards planning? What would you say to them regarding, you know, designing their legacy? What spiritual wisdom would you offer them today? I know this,
So
we've been talking about this last so many minutes, but I'm trying to get it concise into one sentence or two sentences.
yeah, I think the greatest legacy is to love, right?
Okay.
And the whatever fits into that legacy is lasting. The rest of it will eventually fade away, whatever that is. And
Mm,
whatever you think it's going to be, if it's not within that framework, it simply doesn't have a lasting value.
yeah.
There, that was
Yeah, I
short.
think that's great. That's great. Um, in one sentence, what would you like your legacy to be?
I would love to be a saint. I would love to be God's instrument in this world in whatever way He wants me to be a great person of love and to be loved. And that can take so many forms. I am excited to see where He wants to go.
Beautiful. If you were to set aside a weekend or two for the next, a weekend to a month for the next year to plan out your legacy hardcover coffee table book, what images and verses and stories would fill its pages?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I immediately have pictures from the Appalachian Trail, like in my head. Like that was, I guess, my own little hero's journey. I have to acknowledge it's formative for me. Beautiful times from the Abbey would be in that book as well. Beautiful times with my family would be in that book. Gosh, and then going forward, well, there are pages still be to be filled, Angelina. This is the exciting part, you know. This is there's new experiences to be had, and I don't
Yeah.
know.
Um, so chriskineman.com is the best website if a listener would like to reach out to you and book that discovery session.
Yes, Chris, Chris, Koenemann, Koenemann. It's tricky to spell, so I thought I would get there.
I will also make sure that the link is in the show notes. Anything else that you would like to share before I thank
Gr-
you and read my closing paragraph?
I would to share gratitude. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Angelina. I'm very impressed with how you guided it and how you did it. I thank you for this opportunity, but I just like I hope this helps. Like when you write a book, they also say that you hope the book reaches those that can help. I hope that this podcast could reach those that can help, and I hope that you continue to do this great work of reaching people in this way because you're really good at it. So thank you.
Thank you. I think in terms of like audio and video, I think books are amazing, but I also realize that people are tuning into video and audio today because, you go back to teenagers being great around authenticity. And
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
that people tune into podcasts because it's more real than the movies today in Hollywood.
And they're
And they're
easier to
searching.
access. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I want to take a moment to thank you for sharing your journey regarding transitions and also the importance of meeting people where they are. The humility that you brought to today's conversation, and also your understanding about the founder's culture of it being agile and an expectation for great business people to act quickly, but then is the blind spot of our our loyalty to the founder at all costs, and realizing that that conversation needs to be broadened to realize that if there's things going on like factions or the risk of triangulation, that we have to open up a doorway and an invitation for someone to reach out to you, that you do understand all of these facets and the nuances that if one needs to pick up the pieces and rebuild, well, how do you do that, and how do you make it more collaborative so the next chapter can be more fulfilling and can lead to a great legacy, not just one that is ego based, but on bump.
Thank you, Angelina.
In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I coach and consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. And if you feel so inclined, send an email to either Chris or myself and let us know your thoughts and feelings about today's episode. So thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Chris, for speaking into your legacy.